recording.
Brilliant.
All right. So I invite somebody to volunteer, please, to read this text. And Bill, since you didn't mark down where we left off last time, so as a punishment, I'm gonna make you do the reading. How's that?
You know, sometimes we just have to swallow it.
Right.
So, okay.
All right.
Page 18A2, the last paragraph after the space, the Gemara proceeds to the next clause of the Mishnah. If he read the Megillah in Targum, he has not fulfilled his obligation, etc. The Gemara inquires, what is the case? If you say that the Megillah was written in Hebrew and he read it in Targum, that is the equivalent of reading by heart, which is invalid in any language?
In any language. Right? And so what's the situation? What is the Mishnah adding? We already know that you're not allowed to read the Megillah by heart. You have to read what's written in front of you. You have to pronounce the words by looking at the written word and pronouncing it. Well, so then the Gemara asks, if you have a regular kosher Megillah, so it's written in Hebrew, so if it says that he read it in Targum, then he's not reading the Hebrew words. He's looking at the Hebrew words maybe, but then he's ending up saying the Targum. So that's not a proper reading. So we know that already. So what's going on? So the Gemara defines the case.
The Gemara defines the case. Rather, the case must be that the Megillah was written in Targum and he read it in Targum, and yet his reading is invalid because he performed it in a language other than Hebrew.
Okay, so now we're imagining that the reading is a proper reading. I'm reading exactly the words that are printed on the parchment, and the words that are printed on the parchment are a version of the Megillah written in Targum, right, in an Aramaic translation. So it's not the Hebrew, but it's a translation in the interpretive Targum translation that's rabbinically authorized, and it's written, and now we read it out loud. So it's a proper reading, right? But now the question is asked.
The Mishnah said,
well, keep going.
The Mishnah said, but one may read the Megillah in a foreign language for foreigners, etc.
Right. So we know that it's possible to read the Megillah in some other language than Hebrew. So that must be what we have here. Although what it says here is that when he reads it in Targum, he's not fulfilling his obligation. So we're getting a little bit stuck. There seems to be a back and forth here. When do you fulfill your obligation? When not? Okay, go ahead.
One may read the Megillah in a foreign language for foreigners, etc. The Gemara points out an internal contradiction in the Mishnah. But you said earlier in the Mishnah, if he read the Megillah in any language besides Hebrew, he has not fulfilled his obligation. Huh? Right. What's going on?
So when is it okay with another language? When is it not okay?
The Gemara offers a resolution to this difficulty. Rav and Shmuel both say that the latter clause of the Mishnah, which permits the use of a foreign language, refers to the Greek language and not to any other foreign language.
So now we see, and we've had this before.
We've encountered that before, yeah.
That Greek had its own special status because Greek was the lingua franca, to use a Greek word. No, it's not Greek. That was the common language that everybody spoke, right? Today, English would be the closest example of that. The thing that really goes for everybody. And so that was the privileged language that we knew everybody would be able to understand. So that is the one language that the Megillah could go in. Okay, but all other languages, therefore, don't qualify. And of course, Targum doesn't qualify.
The Gemara seeks to clarify the circumstances of Rav and Shmuel's explanation of the Mishnah. What is the case? If you say that the Megillah was written in Ashurit, that is, in Hebrew, and he read it in Greek, that is the equivalent of reading by heart, which is not a valid manner of reading the Megillah? Huh? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Acha said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the Mishnah speaks of a Megillah that was written in the Greek language.
So we discovered that you can actually read the Megillah either in Hebrew, write the Megillah either in Hebrew or in Greek.
In Greek.
Right? And if you read it if you write it in Hebrew, you read it out in Hebrew. If you write it in Greek, you read it out in Greek. That's what we have now so far. Okay, now we take a pause.
Deep breath. Before continuing with the discussion at hand, the Gemara cites another teaching reported by Rabbi Acha in the name of Rabbi Elazar. And Rabbi Acha said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, how do we know that the Holy One, blessed is he, called Jacob by the title El? For it is said, and he called him El, the God of Israel. This must be the correct explanation of the verse, because if it enters your mind that the verse means that Jacob named the altar which he had erected El, it should have said, and Jacob called it El. Rather, this is what the verse means. Who called him El, the God of Israel. And he called Jacob El, who called him El, the God of Israel.
Okay, so look at what the context is, that this is the time when Jacob sets up the pillar to mark his place where God appeared to him with the ladder, right? So the verse is, look at note 31, it gives you the verse. Note 31. Can't hear you. I think you went on mute.
I did not do that deliberately. All right, 31. Genesis 33:20. Rabbi Elazar understands the verse as follows. And he, Jacob, erected an altar there, and the God of Israel called him, Jacob, El. However, the simple meaning of the verse apparently is, and he, Jacob, erected an altar there, and he called it, the altar, El, God of Israel.
Okay, hold on one second.
Yep.
I think that this is a different story. I think I was mistaken. But maybe I wasn't. So this is, yes, it's a different story. So this is later. Okay, this is not the first dream of Jacob when he has the vision of the ladder. This is Jacob wrestling with the angel.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what happened there. And what we have is after he finished, sorry, it's not even that. It's after he finishes leaving Esav, and peacefully. He was worried that Esav was going to seek revenge against against him from 20 years ago. But instead it says, Jacob arrived, this is chapter 33, verse 18. Jacob arrived safe in the city of Shechem, in the land of Canaan. So he finally makes it into the land of Canaan. He makes it back into his homeland, having come thus from Padan Aram, from Laban's home. And he encamped before the city. So he's out the outskirts of Shechem. The parcel of land where he pitched his tent, he purchased from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kasita. So he actually now buys a piece of land to have as his own out on the suburbs. This is the beginning of the suburbs, right? This is the Jews moving out to the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
So he buys the land. And then verse 20, and he set up an altar there and called it Hail Elokei Yisrael. Right? That's the translation that we have. So the subject of the sentence is Jacob, after having bought his own piece of land, he sets up a shrine, he sets up an altar so that he can worship his God, which is the powerful God. El means a God. And the word God here is a powerful force, right? Elokei Yisrael, right? The divine almighty God of Israel. And that's of course his other name, right? So he is marking his territory, so to speak, by setting up that altar in God's name. That's the simple meaning of the text. So now what we have is a very, very radical rereading of it. The translation we have here.
And he, Jacob, erected it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then he, Jacob, erected an altar there, and the God of Israel called him Jacob, El.
Right. So the last two words, Elokei Yisrael, which we understand as part of the whole phrase, this is the name of the altar. Kael, Elokei Yisrael, God, the Almighty God of Israel. The way that Rabbi Acha says in the name of Rabbi Lazar is that we read it as follows. Jacob set up an altar there, and the Almighty of Israel, the last two words of the verse, called him, not the altar, but called Jacob God. Powerful God. So God, when Jacob finally sets up this altar, God reciprocates by calling Jacob a divinity. Okay? So what do we make of this? So the wonderful commentary that we have on the bottom of the page gives us nothing, right? I mean, it just tells us why syntactically that's possible, but it doesn't tell us what is he trying to say. What does that mean? Anybody have any speculations about this? What would it mean to say that God called Jacob El, a god?
I have no real idea, Rabbi. I'm just proposing a question. Is it possible that the word El, like Elohim or Elim, might mean powerful being or divine being, and not literally the Godhead?
Yeah, if you go back to the encounter between Jacob and Lavan, Lavan, when he finally catches up with his son-in-law, he says to him, this is chapter 31, verse 29. It says here, Lavan says, you're so foolish that you ran away. Why don't you tell me? And then 29, I have it in my power to do you harm. Right? In the Hebrew, Yesh le'el yadi la'asot imachem ra. So the word El means a powerful force. When we say Mi chamocha ba'elim Hashem, we say, who is like you, God, among all powerful forces? Right? We sometimes understand as, there's all the false gods, and then who's like you? But it could also mean simply not false gods, but powers. There's a lot of powerful forces in the world. There's so many different sources of real strong energies. But whatever experience of force we have in our world, in our experience, God is incomparable. God is way beyond any of that. So that's what we say when we say Micha Bocha. So here, when God is calling Jacob El, so what Bill is suggesting is it doesn't mean God, capital G. It means why we use the word for God, because it means powerful one, right? You're a winner. You've escaped all of these different terrible challenges, and you're a hero. That would be one way to read it. Yeah, Josie.
I was thinking maybe God is saying, you're my voice on earth, or you're like me among people.
Oh, so that's getting a little closer to the divinity part itself.
Yeah.
You are my walking, representative, my exemplar, my mascot. You are, so when people want to understand who is God, what is God, this invisible force you monotheists are talking about, well, you can have some kind of image of God by looking at Jacob. So, but what's the idea of God calling Jacob God? Why not just have the report being, and Jacob came to Shechem and he was all shalem, he was whole, and he was considered by the populace out there as a godly man, or something like that, right? According to this teaching, God is prompted to call out about Jacob. Oh, it's an adoration, even if we take away the complete, idea of God, of Jacob being a God, but that God calls this out about Jacob. What brings God to exclaim such a thing? There's definitely, like I say, an expression by God of exceptional appreciation, and I would say adoration of this being known to us as Jacob or Israel. David.
This whole line of thinking just doesn't make sense to me. The sentence doesn't end at the word El. It ends El Elohei Yisrael. Now, if you take away if you reduce all of the names to the name Jacob, then it would be, and he calls, instead of Lo, Jacob, instead of El, Jacob, God of Yisrael, Jacob. He calls Jacob, Jacob, God of Jacob. It just doesn't hang.
So, unfortunately, your definitive, rejection of the sense of this statement is not solidly based. If you read the words with the trup, El has a pashta under it, which means you stop, you pause. Vayikra lo El Elohei Yisrael. So that means, therefore, that it's possible, totally possible, to say that Elohei Yisrael called him El. It's not one continuous phrase. El Elohei Yisrael. The El has a pause, which makes it possible to read the end of the verse, which happens in Hebrew all the time, as not the object, but the subject. Yeah. So the verb is, he called him El. Who called him El? Elohei Yisrael called him El. In which case, the only possible object of being called El is not God, but Jacob. So then God, the Almighty God of Israel, called Jacob El. So it's definitely a possible reading. The problem is that conceptually, it's very challenging. This midrash is foundational to what later became the Kabbalistic understanding of how the patriarchs became exemplars of divinity. This is the an early pronouncement that brings us into that sense of a conversation that God has with other parts of God. Well, everything that we've been discussing and studying in the Zohar again and again and again comes out of this kind of early discussion that can conceive of God being bowled over by some godly aspect of a human being. So the idea that Jacob emerges from all of these experiences with a devotion to God, what this teacher is saying is, and God reciprocates that devotion. Not God is just grateful. Oh, I'm glad that you believe in me. I'm glad you love me. It's a reciprocal devotion. So just as Jacob adores God, God adores Jacob. And Jacob becomes fused with the divine presence, very much to what Josie was moving toward in her comments. So this little midrash, and now we're going to forget about it and just go back into reading the Megillah. But this little midrash is actually a very important building block for the Jewish mystical tradition. All right, here we go. Back to more important things. Can we read the Megillah in Greek? Okay, here we go. And there you are, you're muted again.
The cursor was at the other side of my desk. I was nowhere near it, and it decided to do that.
And now you know why it's called a cursor.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
All right.
The Gemara resumes its previous discussion. They objected to Rav and Shmuel's explanation of the Mishnah on the basis of the following baraita. If he read the Megillah in Coptic, Ivrit, Elaman, Median, or Greek, he has not fulfilled his obligation. This conflicts with Rav and Shmuel's explanation of the Mishnah that the Megillah may be read in Greek. What's going on?
Right. So here the word Ivrit, if you see the note for Ivrit, 33. Ivrit is our word now for Hebrew.
Hebrew.
Right? So it sounds, but the Gemara uses Ashurit for Hebrew. Right? It's a little paradox. So they use the word for Assyrian for Hebrew because of the way the letters,
because of the letters,
printed,
yeah.
The font that we use. Yeah. So look at 33.
No, sorry, the language of Eber HaNahar, the side of the river, Euphrates. That's Rashi's understanding. The word Ivrit is from Eber, side. This does not refer to Hebrew, which is valid for everyone, even for those who do not understand Hebrew.
Okay, so what is it? We don't know. Some kind of dialect or some kind of Aramean language. Yeah. Okay.
The Gemara answers that the explanation given by Rav and Shmuel is limited to a particular situation. The answer given by Rav and Shmuel, is comparable to no other case, but that of the following baraita. If the Megillah was read in Coptic to Copts, that is, those who understand Coptic, or in Ivrit to Ivrits, that is, those who understand Ivrit, or in Elaman to Elamans, that is, those who understand Elaman, or in Greek to Greeks, those who understand Greek, Yatsa, he has fulfilled his obligation. Like this baraita, Rav and Shmuel permit the use of Greek only to those who understand Greek. The first baraita, however, which prohibits Greek, refers to those who do not understand Greek.
Okay, so here we go now, making compartments. The use of a foreign language, the whole point of the use of a foreign language is that it will help people understand. So the whole point of Hebrew is that it's the holy tongue. We've had this distinction before. The Megillah is written in Hebrew, and people who cannot understand Hebrew, nevertheless, listening to Hebrew is a mitzvah, because Hebrew is Lashon HaKodesh, is the Hebrew language, is the holy language. But we also have another consideration. Not only do we want to have a celebration, a public celebration of the miracle, we want to get people to appreciate what the miracle was. Right? Pirsume Nisa happens in many different kinds of ways. It can be just a generic kind of publicizing of the miracle. And then it could be much more substantive, where people actually understand what the miracle is. So if you hear the story and you understand it, then you appreciate the miracle on a whole deeper level. So therefore, the possibility of reading the Megillah in a separate language, since the whole point of Purim, it's not in the Torah, right? The whole point of Purim was instituted for people to appreciate that miracles happen even after Torah times. So to publicize the fact that miracles happen, let people understand it. So therefore, we're making for the Megillah this specific kind of dispensation that, depending on which group we're involved in, is untitled. Depending on which group we're involved in, they will need to, if they can understand what's going on, if we can help them understand, we'll do it. So therefore, the Elamians will do that. We'll read the Megillah in Elamian, and the Ivritians will do that in Ivrit, etc., etc., etc. But that legitimacy of that language doesn't transfer to any other group. Only Hebrew is like the type O blood. Only Hebrew is the universal donor. Only Hebrew can be used by everybody, right? Everybody else, it's got to be the language that fits their understanding. Okay.
The Gemara asks, if so, that Rav and Shmuel concede that a distinction exists between those who understand the language and those who do not, why do Rav and Shmuel explain the Mishnah as referring only to the Greek language? Let them explain it as referring to all foreign languages.
Right. Why are they singling out Greek? All they should say is foreign language. They don't have to give an example of Greek, because we have another braita which gives us a whole list of foreign languages. So why are they specifying Greek?
The Gemara concludes, rather, the ruling of our Mishnah is the same as that of the Baraita. That is, it permits all foreign languages, but only to those who understand the language. And the statement made by Rav and Shmuel was not intended as an explanation of the Mishnah, but was stated generally as follows. Rav and Shmuel both say that the Greek language is permitted for everyone, that is, even those who do not understand Greek may hear the Megillah read in Greek.
So now we've slid into a whole different, now we're on A4, 18A4,
Yep.
right? We've been pushed into understanding if they're trying to say something new, then the new idea that they're establishing is that no, Hebrew is not the only universal donor. Greek is also the universal donor, right? Greek, Hebrew is the holy language, and Greek is the universal language, right? It just counts as the world's language today in their time, right? So it's understood by so many people that we give it the standing of a totally acceptable language. Okay, but the Gemara doesn't know whether it wants to accept that. Go ahead. What happened to your cursor? Your cursor again has foiled you. Maybe you have a timer setting or something that not
consciously. All I can say is that I don't have it consciously, but something
you don't have it consciously. Maybe your machine has it consciously.
Yeah, the machine may well have. There's a whole book written about that kind of thing. It's very weird and very strange.
Hal, give Bill a break.
Now I just lost my whole. There we go. Okay, now it's back. All right, I don't know what to do about this thing. All right, I'll have it where I can grab it in case it.
After today, you won't have to worry about it. Go ahead.
Well, for the moment,
yes,
after today,
for the moment, yes.
There's a whole rest of life. But the Gemara questions this. No,
Yes.
questions this ruling. But the Baraita teaches, if the Megillah was read in Greek to Greeks, yes, it is a valid reading. But to everyone else, it is not.
Okay, it is not. So wait a second. How can Rav and Shmuel says it is when we already have a Braita which precedes them, which is more authoritative, which says no, Greek is limited only to Greeks. Greek is not the exception to the rule. So how can they be possibly saying that, contradicting that Braita? My answer is...
The Gemara answers, they, Rav and Shmuel, rule in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. As we learned in a Mishnah, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, even books of scripture were permitted to be written only in Greek.
Okay. So then now we say, okay, you know what? We've got a legitimate source for Rav and Shmuel to disagree with the Braita. Where did we have it? We had it much earlier. We had a dispute between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim about whether Torah in general could be written in Greek. So this is not a Megillah specific argument. The whole argument that I gave before, the justification, well, the Megillah was created in order to publicize the miracle. So therefore, we want people to really get it. So therefore, we can add other languages besides Hebrew, but otherwise Hebrew is the only one. So that's all fine, only for Megillah. But now we know, if we remember, all the way back on page 8, 10 Gemara pages back. So, about 50 years ago when we started studying, we came across an opinion, a shocking opinion, that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said that even the Torah can be written in Greek. Greek is such an accepted language in the world that even the Torah can be written in Greek, and that's what Rav and Shmuel are basing themselves on. So they have an earlier authoritative opinion that they can rely on. But now the Gemara asks,
then let them say, the halacha follows the view of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Why did they have to spell out his ruling?
Right, if they're relying on Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, let them just say, we think that the halacha is like him. Why do they have to teach, well, you can read the Megillah in Greek. We know that. All you have to say is, if you say Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, then we'll know. And he's the real author of this, not you. Why are you taking credit for it? Say it in the name of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. The
Gemara answers, if they would simply have said, the halacha follows the view of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, I might have assumed that this ruling of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel applies only to other books of scripture. But in regard to the Megillah, concerning which it is written as they are written, which implies only Hebrew, I could have said that Greek is not valid. Rav and Shmuel therefore teach us that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's ruling applies even to the Megillah, QED.
So this is a very Purimi kind of answer, where everything is turned upside down. Everything is turned on its head. We would normally expect that there would be stricter rules applied to the 5 books of Moses, to the Torah itself. And the Megillah, which is a Johnny-come-lately, we could be a little more lenient about, because we invented this whole thing. So that was our original way of looking at it. But now the Gemara says, actually, we might be going in the opposite direction. Right? That the Torah as a holy document is given with meaning that is eternal, and therefore even Greek is good. But the Megillah is our own puny, late addition to the canon. And it's, of course, about the idea that we want people to know this story. And we might have thought that, therefore, we want to, endow it. It doesn't have inherent holiness. The Word of God has inherent holiness, no matter what language it's in. In fact, God says, when we cross the Jordan, write out the Torah in 70 languages. So the Word of God can hold any language. But when we're creating a Megillah, maybe in order to give it holiness, we should only use Hebrew. So that's why Rav and Shmuel say Greek is good too. For the purposes of publicizing the miracle, Greek works. Okay? All right.
The next clause of the Mishnah states, and a foreigner who heard the Megillah read in Ashurit, that is, in Hebrew, has fulfilled his obligation, even if he does not understand Hebrew, etc. The Gemara asks, but he does not know what they're saying. How then can this be considered fulfillment of his obligation? The Gemara answers, it is similar to the case of women and unlearned men who fulfill their obligation by hearing the Megillah in Hebrew, even though they do not understand.
Okay, there's a long note here. So let's see what contribution we can get from the comment. 44.
Note 44. Women who were generally unlearned and unlearned men understand some of the Hebrew words of the Megillah, but not all of them. Nevertheless, they definitely fulfill their obligation by hearing the Megillah in Hebrew. This proves that an understanding of every word of the Megillah is not essential for fulfillment of the mitzvah. Rather, the requirement is merely to read or hear the Megillah and participate in the publicizing of the Megillah. Consequently, one who does not understand Hebrew at all may also fulfill his obligation by hearing the Megillah in Hebrew. This approach resolves the difficulty raised by Rashash. Words of the Gemara below, rather the mitzvah is reading and publicizing the miracle, are apparently a continuation of this answer. Before concluding the answer, the Gemara records Ravina's objection to the first part. See Rabbi Hananel and Ritva.
Okay, so we're going to get to the continuation in a second, but the major point here is that there are different ways that people connect up to this. There are going to be certain people who, when they hear the Megillah, they're going to follow, they're going to appreciate the ins and outs of the plot, they're going to appreciate the subtlety of the hidden theology. They're going to get it in many different kinds of ways. But that's not how everybody is going to be included. Everybody else is included simply by being included, right? By showing up. So the fact that the unlettered come to hear the Megillah, that in itself is meaningful, right? That sense of connection that people express by being committed to coming, that enhances the publicizing of the miracle. That enhances the spread and the effect of the miracle itself. So therefore, even a foreigner, by coming, foreigner meaning a person who doesn't understand Hebrew, a person who doesn't understand Hebrew but comes and participates in the public reading of the Megillah, that's a contribution to publicizing the miracle. They're adding critical mass to the public reading of the Megillah. They're adding their own happiness to be part of the general public, and that's good. Dayenu, that's good enough. All right, Josie. No, can't hear a word you're saying.
And why listening to it in Hebrew without really understanding is good, because that's the holy language and you're part of the group. What I don't understand is, why is it also beneficial to listen in Greek if you don't understand Greek? Greek is not holy.
Right. So the answer is, there are enough people. I mean, this is what I would suggest, that when we make the exception for Greek, it's because Greek is such a universally understood language that if you don't understand Greek, you sort of get lost in the group. You get lost in the crowd. The assumption is that Greek will be understood by 90% of the people in the audience, in the congregation, because that's how widespread the use of Greek was. We had a Greek translation of the Torah precisely because Jews understood Greek better than they understood Hebrew. So that's I think the working assumption. Again, it's not each individual person, but it's how do we get a community phenomenon working here? Okay, did anybody else want to say something? We keep on going. We're going fast. Now we're beginning.
We're going very fast.
Now we're beginning to pick up some speed here. Yeah.
I can read even faster if you want that.
Yeah, that's all right.
The Gemara interjects. Ravina objected to it. That is, he objected to the previous statement that adduced proof from the limited case of women and unlearned men. Do we understand the words in the Megillah, Ha'achash Teranim B'nei Ha'ramachim? No one understands these words, and yet we all fulfill our obligation by hearing the Megillah in Hebrew. This proves that the mitzvah of Megillah does not require an understanding of the words.
Right. So here we have Ravina being a kind of a proto-feminist and a very inclusive kind of guy. He says, why are you singling out, you're saying, well, just like women and the illiterates, they fulfill it, so all right, so anybody can fulfill it. That's a put down. That's not being nice. That's a way of saying, well, it's not that important. If the women can do it, so it's not so. He goes, what about us? Us big, smart, sages. We don't understand some of the words in the Megillah, and yet we listen to the Megillah every year and we fulfill our obligation. So why use an example that puts people down? Use an example that puts people up. We had a little bit of a discussion about this in Pirkei Avot. So great sages don't understand all the words of the Megillah, and yet we fulfill our obligation. That proves that you don't have to understand 100%. Right? So that's a much nicer way of bringing the point across. Rather, the
mitzvah,
punchline, here's the punchline, we just waited a little bit.
Rather, the mitzvah is reading and publicizing the miracle. So here too, in the case of those who do not understand Hebrew at all, they nevertheless fulfill their obligation by hearing the Megillah in Hebrew, because the mitzvah is reading and publicizing the miracle.
Right. And it's engaging in a ritual of reading, right, with a public appreciation of that ritual, right? Okay, now these, again, just to say the obvious, these can be separated conceptually. So if you're on a desert island and you want to celebrate Purim, you don't say, well, hey, there's no public here, there's nobody around, so what's the point of celebrating Purim? The answer is you still have to celebrate. You're the public. So you have to read it, even if there isn't a whole bunch of other people around. But when there is, then how much more so? Okay.
The Gemara proceeds to the next clause of the Mishnah. If he read the Megillah discontinuously, he has fulfilled his obligation, etc.
Right. In other words, you read the Megillah, then you stop, then you continue, then you read, then you stop again, which is the way Shomrei has done it for many years. Right? We would read a chapter, and then maybe we would have the band play some music, or we would stop for some other entertainment or something, and then we go to the next chapter. So we didn't just continuously read the entire Megillah. So that's okay, right? You fulfill your obligation. But now we get into a little question about, and an interesting little story about the word.
The Gemara relates, the rabbis did not know what serugin meant.
Right? In the Mishnah, there's the word, if they read the Megillah, say rugin, it's okay. So now a little bit, it's actually contemporaneous with the Rabbi, as we will see in a second. Some rabbis, this was too technical a term for them. How did this word creep into our Mishnah? We don't even know what it means. So of course, following up on what we just read, this is a very artful interpolation into our Gemara. We just talked about how sages don't even know all the words in the Megillah, right? And we should say that as a proof that you don't have to understand every word. So now we have a story which says the sages don't understand the words of their own Mishnah. Forget about the Megillah. They don't understand those words as well. And who's going to come to the rescue? Read the story.
The rabbis did not know what serugin meant until they heard the maidservant of Rebbe's household say to the rabbis as they entered Rebbe's house a few at a time, how long are you going to enter serugin, serugin?
So she knew it means a few and then a pause, a few and then a pause. And she uses it in her natural language, in her natural expression. So what we have here is a flipping again in the story. Before we had Ravina trying to rescue the honor of the women by saying, hey, stop picking on the women. We also don't understand everything. And now we have an even more forceful story of all these great rabbis who don't understand the words. This lowly maidservant, this woman who happens to be just a person who's in the, among the help in Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's house, she knows better than them, and they learn Torah from her. So this is like, the makeup story for what we had before. And we have another story. Go ahead.
A similar incident.
We're on 18A5.
18A5, a similar incident. The rabbis did not know what chalog logos meant until they heard the maidservant of Rebbe's household say to a man who was scattering purslane, how long are you going to scatter your chalog logos? Okay,
so obviously it's purslane. The problem is that I don't know what purslane is.
It's a kind of a weed that's sometimes used in salads that grows rampant in some lawns here. I don't know what the case was in Babylonia, but that's what it is here.
Okay, so here we have again that Rebbe's maidservant knows Hebrew better than they do. And this becomes actually a whole thing, that Rebbe was one of these proponents of, Hebrew. The Mishnah is written in Hebrew, and it's written in what's considered classical rabbinic Hebrew of the purest, most beautiful kind, syntactically, expressions, and so on and so forth. And Rabbi is the editor. So Rabbi was a Hebraist. He loved Hebrew, and he taught his whole household Hebrew of the highest order. So therefore, the other rabbis who didn't have that same education, that same exposure to very special words in Hebrew, they're learning it from his washerwoman, from his scullery cook person or whatever. She knows the Hebrew better than they do. This reminds me of a joke and another joke. So the first is a real joke. A person goes into a kosher restaurant, a kosher deli, right? And this Chinese waiter comes over and gives him the menu and then says, "Nu, was willst du?" So which is Yiddish for so what do you want? What would you like? And he orders, and he talks to this Chinese waiter in Yiddish, and he gets his delicious meal. Afterwards, he goes to the cash register, which is of course supervised by the owner, right? And he says to the owner, "That's amazing. You're teaching your waiters Yiddish?" And the owner goes, "Shh, he thinks I'm teaching him English." So this is a Purim joke. It's about which language do you need in a particular group to function, right? Which is going to be the language that's going to be better for this Jewish deli being able to have Yiddish, is like almost like Greek. It was which reminds me of another joke, right? Does everybody know? It's sort of like a throwaway line, which I don't remember how to set up the whole joke, but Esperanto, as some of you have known, Esperanto was this modern invention of trying to create a universal language that wouldn't have the baggage of all of the nationalistic, problems that languages carry. So Esperanto was created as this utopian kind of project. And for a while before the Second World War, there was some real interest in it, some real effort to try to get it off the ground. And so the story was that at the Esperanto conference, they would have all these creative papers, and then after at the break, when everybody was in the hall, all you would hear was Yiddish. Right, so because it was this Jewish dream. Can we finally clean up the world and get away from all of the baggage?
There's actually a word in Esperanto to refer to that, to speaking at an Esperanto gathering in a language other than Esperanto that people know. It's called krokodili, to crocodile. Right.
So there you are, and it's almost like this one, haloglogos. There it is. It's the same. They got it from here. But anyway. The other joke is not a joke. It's just a fact, but it's a joke. And that is that I don't know if anybody gets the news from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency.
I do.
So then you saw this article, of course. A few days ago, the Oxford University Press finally published a new translation of the Mishnah.
No, I did not see that.
My Chavruta Zichrono Livracha was one of the 3 editors of, and the whole point is that it's a much more responsible translation, and the headline is something like, new accessible translation. Publishing house tries to put out an accessible translation of Mishnah for the public, pricing it at $645.
Yeah, I did see that.
Right? So the idea is that it should be accessible. Everybody should be able to understand the Mishnah by reading this translation. The only problem is nobody will ever be able to afford buying the set.
Because it's almost $700.
An academic, It's an academic, production, which is exorbitantly, priced beyond anybody's. So that's actually the price tag is. The price tag is $640 some odd dollars.
It's very funny
for this 3-volume work. So, speaking personally, I'm not buying. So
I'm shocked.
I'm not getting it. What can I tell you? All right. So back to here. A similar incident.
A similar incident.
In the chat, is that a link to the article? No. JTA articles pop up on my feed periodically. I never. That's right. Now you know. Okay. Good.
A similar
back from the days when news agencies were telegraphic.
Yeah. That was from before the war, the time of the issue, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. I get a lot of news from them. It's good.
Josie, what's that? You're waving goodbye or what?
Who, me? No.
No, Josie's waving her hand.
Josie, are you leaving?
No. When I worked for the Jewish News as part of the big Newark Federation in 1980, I think it was 1975 or to 80, we got the JTA from a ticker tape machine.
Right,
Wow.
right. It was like the Associated Press. It was a wire.
It made a big noise.
It was a wire service.
A strip, and it would have a story on it.
Wow.
There you go. That's right.
Those were the old days.
Those were the good old days.
Where everything was better.
Everything was better. Right. All right. Another incident.
A similar incident. The rabbis did not know what was meant by the verse Sal Selecha, and it shall exalt you, until they heard the maidservant. This is a very wise maidservant, the maidservant of Rebbe's household, as she spoke to a man who was curling his hair. And she said to him, how long are you going to misalsel your hair?
Okay, so there you are. So she really knew Hebrew inside out, and the rabbis are learning from her all the time.
She also had a bit of a mouth on her, apparently, and was not hiding her light under.
Wasn't impressed by all these
No,
guys.
apparently
No,
not.
she had work to do. Right.
A similar incident. The rabbis did not know what was meant by the verse, cast upon Hashem your Yahav. Rabbi Bar Chana said, once I was traveling with an Arab, and I was carrying a load, and he said to me, take your Yahav and throw it on my camel.
Okay. So here we have now a different example of learning here from some non-Jewish person who we would assume was not a big scholar. And nevertheless, because of the work that this person did, he was a schlepper. He schlepped loads all the time. So he knew the word for a burden, right? So shlach yahevcha al Hashem v'hu yachal kalecha. So the yahev is a burden, is a pekel, as we would say in Yiddish, right? You've got that heavy backpack on your back.
Pekel, yeah.
Give it over to God. God will carry it for you. Go ahead.
A similar incident. The rabbis did not know what was meant by the verse, and I shall tete with a mata'ate of destruction. And they heard the maidservant of Rabbi's household say to her friend, take the tatesa broom and ta'ati sweep the house.
Okay, and that's our modern Hebrew word for a broom. It's a matate. Right. So we got it from Rebbe's maidservant. Okay, good. Zichrona livracha. May her memory always be a source of blessing.
Indeed. But we don't know her name.
No.
We don't know her name. Pity.
Okay, this story is not of how long are you going to be doing this? The other three that we had from her, each one was how long are you going to be messing around with the vegetables? How long are you going to do that? This one is simply go get your work done. Go take the broom and get going. Right. Okay.
Okay. The rabbis taught in a baraita, if he read the Megillah discontinuously, he has fulfilled his obligation.
And we reach page 19.
Yeah, now.
No, we don't. I'm sorry. we reach 18b.
18b1. Okay, give me a sec. Unusually, I didn't staple this whole sequence together because it was too thick, and I didn't get around to stapling the parts of it, so sometimes it's out of order. Anyway, 18b1. If he read it out of sequence, he has not fulfilled his obligation.
Uh-oh. So, go ahead.
So we're in trouble. Rabbi Emunah says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, even in the case of reading the Megillah discontinuously, if he paused the amount of time that it takes to finish the entire Megillah, he must go back to the beginning of the Megillah and read it again.
Okay. So the question is, how much tolerance do we have for isolating pieces of the Megillah? So the answer is we have to, first of all, it's got to be read in order. But if it's a separate piece and we just wait all day long, isn't that the same thing as just reading the wrong piece at the wrong time, or just keeping pieces as discrete units and not keeping the flow? The answer is, well, there's a time limit, right? We assess how long would it generally take to read the whole Megillah. And then based on that, we will allow you to take a pause and within that time frame, but keep it continuous. Okay.
The Gemara cites a legal decision. Rav Yosef said, the halakha is in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Emunah that he reported in the name of Rabbi Yehuda.
Right. Which means that we have to abide by this time limit.
The Gemara seeks to define Rabbi Emunah's ruling. Abaya asked Rav Yosef, what is the definition of, quote, the amount of time that it takes to finish the entire Megillah, end quote? Does it mean the amount of time it would take to read from where he is, that is, from where he passed, to the end? Or perhaps it means the amount of time it takes to read from the beginning of the Megillah to the end? The Gemara answers, Rav Yosef answered Abaya, it means from the beginning of the Megillah to the end, because otherwise you will have subjected your ruling to varying limits.
Okay, so we need one standard. We need one time limit. Otherwise, if I stop for, after the first chapter, then the time limit for me will be 25 minutes. But if I stop after the 8th chapter, then the time limit for me would be 5 minutes. So the time limit would change in terms of how much of a pause I can have, depending on when I'm pausing. So that's too flexible. Let's get a general rule that everybody can remember, right? You're allowed to pause X number of minutes, period, wherever it is. Look at note 1.
Note 1 on page 18b1. In formulating their legislation, the rabbis generally sought uniform rulings that apply equally in every situation. They did not wish their laws to be subject to varying circumstances. Therefore, in our case, the length of pause which invalidates a Megillah reading is not the time it takes to read from where the pause was made to the end, because then the law would vary from case to case. Rather, the length of a disqualifying pause is the time it takes to read from the beginning of the Megillah to the end, an amount of time that applies uniformly. That actually makes sense.
I'm glad you feel that way. I just want to though highlight, this is not obvious.
Yeah.
And it's not obvious how to apply this consideration. Because of course, I mean, here we are, we've been studying Gemara long enough to see that nuances and differences and exceptions are very important to any legal system. And one size does not fit all. We have to make decisions that apply only in this case, but not in that case. We've had that again and again and again. So that's one part of the concern for writing a law, a system of law, which is just and adequate, is that it needs to cover specific situations. It needs to be true to the situation that it's addressing. On the other hand, in order for law to be effective, you can't be, it has to apply to everybody, and it can't be a specialized system of knowledge that only the biggest expert will know. Right? In a regular shul, most people who practice on a regular basis should know in a rough and ready way what the rules are for everything. So to make the rules accessible, they have to be kept simple. So this is actually a push and a pull. There's a tension between these two considerations. And how you apply the law is not automatic. And that's one of the reasons there's such a thing as a rabbi. The rabbi in a particular case is supposed to be able to be sensitive enough to decide when do we apply the general rule and when does the general rule get overruled by the specific situation. And if you just have the general rule memorized, you might apply it in times when it really isn't actually the best thing to do. So how do you know when and where and what are the permissions for that kind of flexibility? That's what a Rav is supposed to be constantly working on, so that you can apply the law in the specific situation in the proper way. And it's understood in the community, in the Jewish community that actually tries to live by the halacha. It's understood that two people can go to the rabbi with very similar questions and get two opposite answers, because the little bit of a difference between one person's situation and another person's situation can make all the difference in the world. And if you just apply the rules in a generalized kind of way, you will actually not be doing justice, literally justice. You won't be doing justice to the people that are asking you the question. This was, on a theoretical level, one of the big fights that erupted in the Jewish world when the Shulchan Aruch came out. Right? So the Shulchan Aruch is the code of Jewish law, or it's actually only one particular code. There are other people who have written other codes of Jewish law, but it's the last code of Jewish law that got accepted by most of the Jewish people that abide by traditional Judaism. So it was written in the 1500s, right? It was written in the middle of the 1500s. So we've been, using the Shulchan Aruch now for it's getting close to 500 years, almost 500 years. In the old days, when people wrote a Shulchan Aruch, they didn't call it, they called it, so Rambam wrote a code, Rav Alphus wrote a code, the Tur wrote a code, the Rosh wrote a code. In general, historians of Jewish law have pointed out, the biggest historian, Menachem Elon, pointed out that in general, there would be a code, and different people would write, great rabbis would write synopses of Jewish law, and some would catch on and some wouldn't catch on. But these ones that I mentioned, they caught on and they were accepted as authoritative and as worthwhile. And every 200 years or so, we would need a new code. And somebody would write a new code because things need to be taken into consideration. Things have to be adjusted on a global level. The Shulchan Aruch was the last code that was written in this kind of historic rhythm. It was written approximately 200 years after the Tur. And it was a kind of a simplification of the Tur, but also an expansion into others, examples and so on. So, and then that rhythm broke down. And we haven't had an authoritative Jewish code since the Shulchan Aruch. We should have had one approximately in the year 1800, right? By this predictive rhythm. Why didn't we have one? The answer is because Jewish life had completely changed by the year 1800. modernity had hit, the emancipation had hit, the French Revolution, and then Napoleon, and the Enlightenment. All of that stuff broke apart the cohesiveness of the traditional Jewish community. So there wasn't enough of a cohesive Jewish community and a consensus of what the Jewish people needed for there to be able to be one code that would be accepted all over the world for the Jewish people. So we're left with the Shulchan Aruch. But even when the Shulchan Aruch was written, people opposed the Shulchan Aruch. Great rabbis opposed the Shulchan Aruch because they said, this is not going to be flexible enough. It's not going to be able to be used in a particular specific way to address the needs of any particular moment. It's going to be dangerous. It's going to dumb down decision making, and people are going to be afraid to make any decision other than the Shulchan Aruch, because there it is, it's written in the Shulchan Aruch, so this must be the right answer. But if you actually know the halacha, you'll know that the Shulchan Aruch is a generalization, but then it has to be applied in very specific examples. I had the unfortunate experience a number of years ago at Shomrei, where a question came out, and I decided to do something a certain way, and somebody else who thought then that they knew better said, I don't know, I would just follow the Shulchan Aruch. And the problem was, no, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't apply in this particular case. But if all you have is the Shulchan Aruch, then you're not going to make the right decision. So this idea that we want to keep things simple and generalized is a very important value. It makes it easier to keep people all on the same page, literally. But then sometimes we got to be careful. Sometimes we have to, move back a little bit on that. Okay, let's see if we can get a little bit further.
The Gemara records, the Gemara records a dispute. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, who said in the name of Rav. The halacha is in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Emunah.
So remember, we had before, the Gemara said, when Rav and Shmuel said that we could use Greek, why don't they just simply say, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? Why can't we just simply say, if there's a previous opinion, why not just say so in the name of that person with the previous opinion? So now here we have an example of that. We have a dispute, and Rabbi Emunah said his opinion versus a different opinion, and now we have somebody saying, no, that's the halacha. The halacha is like Rabbi Emunah. Okay, but Shmuel said.
But Shmuel says the halacha is not in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Emunah.
Okay, so we have an argument about how to decide Jewish law.
In Surah, they taught as above, but in Pumbedita, they taught as follows. Rav Kahana said in the name of Rav, the halacha is in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Emunah. And Shmuel says the halacha is not in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Emunah.
Okay, so we have different names. And now let's keep going.
An alternative version of this dispute between Rav and Shmuel, in which their opinions are reversed. Rav Bivi taught the reverse. Rav said the halacha is not in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Emunah, and Shmuel said the halacha is in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Emunah.
So we've had this occasionally, but this is certainly an extreme example of meticulous record keeping of the fact that we don't have accurate records, right? There's a paradox here, because what we have here is different versions. We know that there was a dispute about whether we agree with this rabbi or that rabbi. That we know. But who said which and who said which, side and who took that, we actually then have a whole confusion of. So on the macro level, we know some people agree with that rabbi, some people don't agree with that rabbi. But the who, we try always to keep that list of tradition, name by name, accepted in a clear way. And here we didn't do it. We weren't able to actually keep the accurate records itself. Okay. Real quick, we'll read the next paragraph. We can't understand all of it, but just to get to the punchline, which is interesting.
The Gemara concludes, Rav Yosef said, adopt the version of Rav Bivi. For Shmuel is generally the one who takes the opinion of an individual into account where it is more stringent than the majority opinion. As we learned in the Mishnah, if a woman was awaiting her yavam, and his brother then betrothed her sister, it is said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, we tell him, wait until your oldest brother acts, that is, perform either yivum or chalitza, before consummating the marriage. And Shmuel said in regard to this Mishnah, the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, even though it is only a minority view.
So we're not going to have time, and we're not going to go into the details of that particular legal situation. But just to point out that this idea of rules of how to decide halakha, we have here being discussed in terms of whose opinions do we take into consideration. Usually, we say majority rules, right? That acharei rabim lahatot. That's a verse in the Torah, and we understand it as meaning that that's the way you take. You have all the rabbis can disagree, and then you have to just put something up as a vote. And then if most of the rabbis adopt one position, so no matter how great the other rabbis are, it doesn't matter. Majority rules. But here we have a slightly different approach, which says majority rules, but if the minority is more stringent, then maybe we should worry about the minority's opinion. We could be better safe than sorry, right? Since being more stringent is always better, we're avoiding any possible sin, so we should follow the minority opinion when it's more strict. We follow the majority opinion when it's more strict. So we have, basically, we're always going to be strict, right? If the majority says we should take the strict opinion, the majority wins. If the minority says we take the strict opinion, then the minority wins, because we don't want to be, God forbid, guilty of sin. And of course, this comes back to a philosophical question, which is when we say majority rules, is that it means that that's really the rule. That's the law. The law is whatever the majority says. Or do we say majority rules is a socio-political compromise? We can't agree on what the rule is, so let's just all agree that it's easier to follow the majority. And this way we don't kill each other. So if the rule really is according to the majority, then it shouldn't matter whether the majority is strict or lenient. That's the rule. But those who feel that no, if the minority is more strict, we should follow the minority, they believe that the rule is not really what the majority says. That's simply a social compromise, but maybe they're wrong. And therefore, since we don't want to sin, we should always be strict. And if somebody has of the opinion that's stricter than the majority, we should take their opinion into account, because God forbid we don't want to do anything wrong. So these are two deeply different philosophies of law that are brought here into a very specific, small situation. This is it for us. We got as far as we could get. And it's been a real joy for me, as I've said.
Thank you, Rabbi.
The joy has been ours.
Thank you.
The joy is ours and the pleasure is ours. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you, Rabbi.
Toda Rabbi.
So, bevakasha, God willing, next week at the brunch, I will try to be able to celebrate the completion of this Masechet. We've gotten up to 18b, whatever it is, 1, 2.
B1.
And I'll try to do the rest of it. There's about another half of a Masechet to do. So hopefully we'll have a siyum next Sunday.
Oh, that'll be
So
exciting.
everybody's invited. Okay?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yasher
All
Koach.
right. Have a
Stay
great
safe,
week.
everyone.
Tigers.
It's a drop in the ocean, but thank you very much.